Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank each and every one of you who decide to join in with me on this live podcast. So far, I see my mom on here. Thank you, Dola, so much for joining in with us on tonight. Latanya Rainey, thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. At this time, I'm going to ask each and every one of you to go ahead and like the video, love the video, share the video out, tag some people in. Sherry Dillard, thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. I am so happy to see you on here tonight. Sherry, at this time, if you could go ahead and like the video, love the video, whatever you feel like you want to do, share it out for us and tag some people in. I think that this message is really going to be impactful on tonight. It's a message that God gave me about disconnection notice. So I think it's going to be impactful. I think it's going to help a lot of people out. It's based off the word of God. So, like I said, at this time, if you all will be so nice and so helpful to me, while I let Facebook indicate to others that I'm on tonight, if you all would just start tagging people in. Charlene, thank you so much for joining in with me on this podcast tonight. It's truly a blessing to see you on here tonight. And I just want to thank you for joining in with us on tonight. So at this time, I'm going to allow Facebook a few minutes to tag some people in because I feel like this message is going to make us see things in a different light and know how to disconnect when it's time to disconnect, when God has you on a mission. So at this time, it looks like I've greeted everyone so far that I've seen. Like I said, I'm going to allow Facebook to go ahead and draw audience in and let them know that I'm on tonight before I start. Thank you. Tamika, thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. I just want to ask everybody, how's their day going today? Today is every day that God gives us a chance to be on this earth is truly a blessed day. Tamika, thank you so much for tagging the people in. Pierre, thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. Pierre says he's sending love. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You all, I was telling everybody to go ahead and tag some people in on tonight because I don't want anyone to miss this message. I think this message is going to be truly impactful. It's a word that God had gave me about a disconnection notice, and we all know what disconnect means. It means to not be connected to something, to separate. And I think that this is going to be impactful for a lot of people to hear on tonight. Um, I'm trying to wait and give about maybe one more minute so that people won't miss the beginning of this message. Um, but nevertheless, thank you, Tamika. Tamika said her day was great. That's good. Nevertheless, they can always go back and watch the replay. So, um, like I said, I'm gonna give Facebook like one more minute and then I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Okay. Um the message that I got from God is about a disconnection notice. Now we know that When someone disconnects or you get a disconnection notice, that means that service is no longer going to be provided to that place or to that person or to that house. And what I began to look at, I said, sometimes in this life, we got to learn to disconnect from the things that's actually draining us. I began to look at a car. Now, if a car has one problem, then it starts one problem on a car can start to affect another thing on the car, which causes a whole issue for the car. I began to look at a car. A car has an alternator. And I'm not a mechanic, but I hear, people talking about it, and I have had an issue with my alternator before. And one thing I do know that if there's a problem with the alternator, then the alternator starts to drain the battery. So sometimes you could be connected to people, places, or things that when one thing go wrong, it causes a domino effect to everything else. So as we look at the car, if the alternator is bad, it starts to drain the battery. And if it starts to drain the battery, then there is no power to the car. Something like sometimes how our life go, if one thing goes bad, then it starts to affect another thing, and then if it affects another thing, it starts to drain the battery, the energy, the power that we once had. And as I began to look at this passage about disconnection notices, God began to tell me that sometimes when he's doing a new thing, the Bible says, behold, I'm doing a new thing in your life. Old things have passed away because I'm trying to do something new in your life. So what happens is you have a bad alternator, but in order to get the car to start again, you got to do something different. Meaning the old alternator has to go and you have to replace it with a new one in order to get the battery to charge again. So God has begun to say that sometimes you got to change people, places, and things in your life in order to restore your power, in order to restore your authority. Because sometimes we can get so far out there because we've had so many things pulling at us and so many things riding our back that sometimes we don't realize that the alternator in our life is going bad, not realizing that if the alternator in our life it goes bad, then the battery will eventually drain and you'll find yourself at a place of stagnation where you're stuck and you really don't understand why. So God had begun to show me that sometimes you got to disconnect. Just like a car, you got to disconnect some things in order to get things recharged back up. So if I disconnect the old alternator to replace it with something new, God says I'm doing a new thing in your life, then the battery can get a charge again. Sometimes we got to disconnect ourselves from the places and the people that we're so familiar with. Thank you, J. Lou, for joining in on tonight. That we're so familiar with because we don't realize that we are being drained and that the alternator is not going to be able to charge the battery if we don't get rid of the bad situation. So as I began to look at and I got excited because sometimes I tell you all the time, and I've been telling you all that the Bible is so important for our life. The Bible is like the manual and instructions of our life. That the Bible, if you get into the Bible, Paris, thank you so much for joining in. If you study the Bible says, the word says, study to show yourself approved. If you study the word, everything that you're going through in your life, I guarantee you can find yourself someplace in the Bible. But I also guarantee you that God has an answer in the Bible for whatever you're going through. I'm talking about a disconnection notice. I'm talking about being disconnected. I also began to look at ComEd. So what ComEd does is they provide light. The Bible provides light. But one thing we have come to realize that issues can change the plan. Now, when you got a ComEd bill, you on a plan where you pay them every month in order for them to provide a service to you. And if you don't pay com ed, then your plan begins to change. Now, at some point, they may let you get on a payment plan, but it's still a plan and something has to be done. Thank you, Taz, for joining in on tonight. So what happens with com ed, if you don't pay your bill, then com ed don't produce light for you. So what God is beginning to show, that sometimes when it seems like everything is dark and everything is dim and there is no light, you got to get to the point where you say to yourself, where have I stopped producing in my life? Because everything right now seems dark and everything right now seems dim in my life. But I understand that God had a plan for my life. Remember, I told you God has a plan, a purpose, and God has a plan and a purpose for your life. And when your life stopped producing, you got to step back and say, what happened to the plan that I was on with God? That's when God began to show me that sometimes you got to come to the point where you says that, listen, either my plan has gotten disconnected or I need to disconnect from some other plan. Thank you, Jesus. So as I began to look and as I began to study, it brought me to Genesis 13. And I began to look at Abraham, and I began to look at Lot. Now, in this story, it talks about Abraham. Remember, God told Abraham, what I need you to do, I need you to pick up, take your wife, and leave your family and go to a country where I'm going to show you something different. Thank you so much, Martise Porter, for joining in. So God has this conversation with Abraham, and he tells Abraham, listen, Abraham, I have a plan and I have a purpose for your life, but I also have a promise for you. But what I need you to do, Abraham, for me, I need you to disconnect from the things that you were once connected to. What am I saying? He tells Abraham, you have to leave your father's house, take your wife, and go to another country that I'm going to show you. So God tells Abraham, you got to disconnect from the people that you was once connected to. We're talking about disconnection notice. Now I'm going to show y'all something. God is so good. He showed me something in the Bible. Now, before I get into this story, I'm going to tell you a little bit. Abraham had a nephew. His nephew's name was Lot. God never told Abraham to bring Lot with him. Abraham decides that, Monique, well, thank you so much for joining in. Abraham decides that he's going to take his nephew Lot on this journey with him. Now, remember that. Abraham only was to take his wife and go on this journey. But he decides that his nephew is so important to him that he's going to pull his nephew on the plan and a promise that God has for his life. So God began to show me something. Sometimes your problems can already be there, or your problems can be brought into your plan. And what he began to show me about Adam and Eve. In the beginning, when God created Adam and Eve was placed in the garden. So Adam and Eve was placed in their promise. Now, the serpent was already created in the beginning, so the serpent was already there. So Adam and Eve didn't pull the serpent into their problem. What they did is they allowed him to do something, and they never stopped him from creating a problem. Now, Abraham and Sarah has not gotten to their promise. Adam and Eve was in their promise. Abraham and Sarah has not gotten to their promise, and their problem was brought with them, which was the nephew Lot. Sometimes you got to understand, sometimes problem can take you so far if you don't stop it. And it can take you so far out of the calling of your promise and your plan from God. So God is saying sometimes you got to stop it before it pulls you out of the promised land. Now we're talking about Adam, and I'm not talking about Adam and Eve. I'm just saying how I'm giving an illustration of how they was placed in their promise. Abraham and Sarah had to get to their promise, but they both encountered problems within the promise. So God is saying you can't take God's will for your life and add it to your will. It's not going to work. So now I'm going to talk about Abraham and Sarah. So what happens is it says, so Abraham went up to Egypt, to the Nev gates, and his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with them. So what Abraham does is Abraham does obey God, but he also disobeys God at the same time, because he takes his wife, but he also adds another person, which is his nephew. So Abraham goes up and he begins on his journey with the wife, and Lot went with him. So he took his nephew with him. Never was part of the promise and never was part of the plan. Now, remember, I said sometime you can find yourself if one part of the car break down, so your alternator goes bad. Now the alternator drains the battery, which creates a problem for the whole car. Check it out. You got Abraham and Sarah, but now he brings Lot with him. So Abraham has become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and in gold, but he takes his nephew with him. He pulls his nephew into a plan based upon something that God had spoken to him. God gave him specific instructions to leave your father's house and take your wife and go. So he obeys and he disobeys at the same time. It says once they go up to the place, he comes to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where the tents had been earlier. So there was a tent there, and where he had first built his altar. So Abraham had built an altar there. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord. So now Abraham is calling on God, but he takes Lot with him. Check it out. I'm going somewhere with y'all. I'm going to make all sense in a minute. It says, now Lot, who has moved about with Abraham, Lot is with Abraham and had flocks and herds and tents. So check it out. Lot is also just as successful as Abraham. So these are two people who are successful. Abraham is on his way to the promise. Lot is bringing everything that he got to try and go to the promise with Abraham. So Lot is not broke. He has something just as well as his uncle has. So it says now Lot brings his stuff. Remember, Lot brings everything that he has with him, because the Bible tells us that Lot brings his flocks, his herds, and his tents. It says, but it gets to the point, God is trying to give Abraham, send him to the promised land. And it says, but the land could not support them while they stayed together. Y'all check that out. Now, God is giving Abraham this land, telling him go to another country. Abraham decides that Lot is so important to his life that he's going to bring Lot. And now Lot brings a lot of baggage with him, because now here comes Lot on the mission. And Lot has his flock, his herd, and his tent. So now Abraham has all his stuff. Lot has all his stuff. So now you got a lot of stuff going on. But remember, Abraham is trying to get to a place that God is going to show him. But there's a lot going on in the midst of things. And it says now the land is too small for both of them to dwell together, because remember, Lot has brought his possessions. Abraham has his flock, his tent, and his herdmen. So you got Abraham's stuff and you got Lot's stuff, and now you got a lot of stuff going on. But remember, Abraham has to get to the promised land, but there's a lot going on right now. So now Abraham has his stuff and Lot is coming with them. And as I begin to look at this passage, and it says that the land was not big enough for both of them to stay on. They were not able to stay together. Let me tell you something. You got to look at the red flags. You got a lot of stuff that you're carrying to the promised land. And now you bring somebody else who has a lot of stuff that they're carrying to the promised land. So right now we're on a mission from God, and I pulled my nephew in, which was not part of the plan. So now we have a lot going on, to the point where the path that God is trying to take me on is so much happening right now. And there's so many people in this plan that we can't even be contained in the same place. It's a red flag. Something is about to happen. Remember, I said you can't take God's will for your life and add your will it's not going to work. You're going to run into red flags and problems all the time, but thank God for discernment. Y'all, I'm going to break it all the way down, and I think this is going to bless a lot of people tonight, and I'm going to show you what God has showed me. So it says, now Abraham heard and Lot heard, starts to arguing. So now I'm bringing you in the plan that God has given me. But because you're my nephew and I love you so much, and notice this was not an outside job, this was an inside job, because Abraham and Lot's were relatives. So it wasn't the people on the outside that was hindering the mission. It was the relative on the inside that hindered the mission. But check it out. Abraham obeyed and disobeyed at the same time, because when God spoke to Abraham, he never included Lot in the plan. You got a lot going on. So sometimes you got to say to yourself, I got so much going on in my life that I'm jumping off the path and I'm jumping off the promise that God has showed me. God gave me a clear-cut picture, but because I got so much baggage in behind me, I got my stuff and then I got my nephew's stuff, and now our stuff is starting to collide that we can't even get along on the journey, and now problems break out. Check out the red flags, but thank God for discernment. Pay attention to the problems that comes when you on a mission. So it says that problems arose, and it says now the Canaanites and the Perizzites are also living on the land at this time. Now check it out. You know, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were like their enemies, but check it out. We don't even have time to pay attention to our enemies because we making so much noise with each other. Check, it was an inside job, never an outside job. Now check it out. Abraham and his nephew, they weren't arguing. Check it out. It was the people that they brought with them. Abraham's men start arguing with Lot's men, but check it out. We going through a place where we have enemies, but because we got so much going on, we have lost identity on the enemies that's on the land because we got a lot going on. That's a situation that is pulling Abraham away from the calling and the purpose and the promise that God was giving him, because Abraham decided that I love my relative so much that I'm going to tell him to come with me and bring his stuff. Sometimes you can't take people because they got too much stuff going on in order for you to ask them to come into the promise that God has gave you. Lot had so much going on with his herdsmen and Abraham herdsmen that it started trouble in the land. So now as I begin to look, and it says, so let me tell you something. God says, stop pulling people into the plan and the promise that I gave you. You want everybody to see what I haven't even shown you. So you go out of your way to tell them, come with me. And sometimes we always think, and I'm just only going by the story, and I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but I'm just reading what it goes on. You say that it's the enemies on the outside that's hating on you, but this story shows you that it was an inside job, that the problem came from the uncle and the nephew. They didn't have a problem in particular, but the circle that they were in. See, remember, Abram had his circle, Lot had his circle. So the two circles that they brought with them started to collide. And now if it keeps going and nobody stops it, then it's going to be problems between the uncle and the nephew. Remember, I told you Adam and Eve, God placed them inside the promise. He placed them inside the garden and told them to control the garden. So the serpent was already in the garden because he was created in the garden. So the problem that they had already existed inside the garden. Now, when we go to Abraham and Sarah is trying to get to the promise, but the problem they had was a problem that they brought with them. God is saying, you can't, Pat, thank you so much for joining in. You can't keep pulling people inside the plan that God has for you. Remember, the Bible says, God, not my will, but your will. See, you can't take God's will and add your will to God's will. It's not going to work. Linda Boo, thank you so much for joining in. And so it says, so Abraham says to Lot. So it says, finally, Abraham says to Lot. So finally means we don't know how long they were traveling on this through this country. And we don't know how long the herdsmen, the circles that they carry, were bickering and quarreling with each other. But the Bible says, finally, Abraham says to Lot. So it tells me sometimes you got to be so tired of being drained, of being your energy depleted and everything taken out of you. You got to be so tired of your alternator going out and draining your battery that you say, finally, let me change the situation that I'm in. Finally, let me do something different. Because if I keep a bad alternator around me, it eventually drains my battery. And if it drains my battery, then the car is going to be stalled and we no longer going to move. Thank God for red flags. So what it says is, so finally, Abraham to me gets tired. He basically says, I'm tired of what's going on. He said, I got to do something different. Abraham understands that at this point, I believe Abraham comes to his truth and say, God never told me to bring my nephew with me. And now because I decided to obey and disobey, that it's starting to have problems. The problem is not between me and my relative, but it's the circle that my nephew has. And then it's my circle. My circle can't get along with his circle, so it's creating a lot of problems within the mission that God is taking me on. And if I don't stop this right now, I'm never going to get to the promised land, because if they keep going the way they going, we already got enemies on the land. And because my circle is fighting with your circle, the enemies are going to get wind of this, and then we're going to be messed up. Don't let nobody pull you so far off the promise and the path that God has for you, because it's too much going on. See, there's a lot going on in this situation. A simple situation turns into a lot of problems because the circles don't see the vision and the plan that God has given you. Thank God. So it says, so Abraham finally says to Lot. So Abraham at this point says, listen, I'm fed up with what's going on. Probably saying in his mind, I should have never brought you with me, because if I go back to the original conversation that God had talked to me about, he told me to leave my father's house and leave my family behind and take my wife and go to a land that he has promised me. So Abraham says, listen, let me go back to the beginning. Remember what I told you about? Sometimes you got to go back to the beginning of the plan, and you got to go back and say, God, say it to me one more time, or God, bring it to my memories how you told me to do it. So now Abraham goes back and says, listen, let me cut you a deal. See, Adam and Eve didn't stop the problem that was in the garden. I'm going to tell you something very clearly. God showed me in the beginning when God placed them in the garden, Adam never stopped the problem that was going on, and that was the serpent. Now, Abraham is getting to the promised land with his wife, but Abraham decides, I'm going to stop this thing before it get bigger than what it is. See, sometimes, as I begin to tell you, it says, how far can this take you? If we keep going at the path we go on, we headed for destruction. How far can it take you? How far can it take you out the calling and the promise and the plan that God has for your life? Abraham says, I'm going to stop this before it pushes me off track. I'm going to stop this before it pushes me out of the promised land. Don't let the actions of others control your destiny. Because if Abraham wouldn't have stopped Lot and his men, then Abraham was heading for problems. Sometimes you got to say, I got to let everything go before you change me and my path. So now Abraham says to Lot. Now, Abraham, let me tell you something. That was Abraham's nephew. And Abraham was a father of many nations, and Abraham had got a promise from God. So Abraham had a calling to fulfill, and he had a mission that he was on. Abraham decides that because he loves his relative so much, I want to bring him with me. Now, the relative was wealthy, just like Abraham. So you would have think that no conflict was going to come between them, because we equal at this point. I got this and you got this, so we should be able to get along. But sometimes God shows you, when you pull people in the plan and the purpose that God has for you, there's going to be some turbulence along the way. Thank you, Tasha, for joining in. So now Abraham says to Lot, he says, let's not have any quarrels between you and me, or between your herds and mine, for we are close relatives. So Abraham says to Lot, let me reason with you. He says, before me and you start quarreling, because if my circle keeps getting into it with your circle, I can see that there's going to be a problem between me and you. I'm going to stop this before it gets out of hand. He tells his nephew, he says, you know what? He says, let there not be a problem because we close relatives. Isn't it funny how families are so broken? They grew up in the same household together, and now we can't get along. We can't stand each other, all because your circle don't agree with my circle. And if I don't agree with the way you think, and if you don't agree with the way I think, then we have problems, but we relatives. So what Abraham does, he says, listen, he says, I don't want no problems with you. He says, you my nephew and I love you. He says, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse the thing that I did, because I started this problem. God never told me to bring you with me, but I told you to come with me. You were never part of the plan, because God has a plan for your life, Lot. But I took you off the place. I took you from where you were going, and I asked you to come with me. So now we bumping heads. Keisha, thank you so much for joining in with me on tonight. Now we bumping heads. So what he says is, he says, Lot, he says, I don't want to have no issues with you. You my family at the end of the day. And before I let the circles that we hang with break us up, I'll separate from you. So what he tells Lot, he said, it's not the whole land before us. So Abraham says, listen, Lot, I'm going to take you to the side, because sometimes in order to fix a disagreement, sometimes you need to pull your relatives to the side, or you need to pull your friends to the side, because if you try to do it in front of the circle, the problem only escalates. So what he says is, he says, let me pull you to the side. He says, it's not the whole land before us. So he tells them, look at all this land that God promised us. He says, let's part company. So Abraham says, I think we need to disconnect from each other. We need to separate. This just ain't working. He says, but I love you because you're my nephew. He says, and because I called you on a journey that God called me on, he says, I'm going to do something even better for you. He says, what I'm going to do is, he says, hey, Lot, you choose which way you want to go first. Sometimes, don't you know, you got to be the bigger person in order for the sake of you completing your mission. You got to be the bigger person and give the other person the upper hand on you, just to keep the peace, so that you can continue the promise and the plan of God. Because after all, you the one that pulled them in the plan. Abraham asked Lot to come with him. Lot didn't get the call from God. So Abraham says, I tell you what, Lot, I'm not going to fall out with you. You my nephew. I'm not going to go there with you. But what I'm going to do is, I think it's best that we separate. Because these circles that we running in, they starting to collide. Your people ain't agreeing with my people. And the Bible says, how can two walk unless they agree? So the Bible tells you, if there is no agreements on two people walking, ain't nothing happening. How can you walk in the same promise and plan if we don't agree? So what he says is, this is becoming a problem. Like he says, but I tell you what, he said, you see all this land that's before us. He says, what I want you to do, he says, we're going to separate. He said, I'm going to separate. He said, let's part. He says, because you holding me back. All this bickering and quarreling ain't doing nothing but causing a delay and a hindrance to the plan and the purpose that God has for me. So what he says is, he say, if you go to the left, he say, I don't care which way you go. He say, you pick. He says, I'm going to give you the right to pick where you want to go. And wherever you go, if you go to the left, I'm going to the right. But if you go to the right, I'm going to the left. See, Abraham says, listen, because you my nephew, and I got you scrambled up in some things that God is trying to give me, I'm going to let you go your way, and I'm going to go my way. God says sometimes I'm trying to separate you from people, but if I don't separate you with the right attitude, then you're going to find yourself trying to go back. Y'all check that out. So Abraham goes to Lot, and he goes to him in love, because the Bible says love will cover a multitude of sins. Abraham says, listen, we got to disconnect. We got to disconnect from each other. He says, but I'm going to let you get the first pick on where you go. If you want to go to the left, I'm going to the right. And if you go to the right, I'm going to the left. See, Abraham did something that we all going to have to learn how to do. What Abraham did is, Abraham says, listen, I'm not going to pick a side. I'm not going to pick my herdsman over your herdsman. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to allow you to separate from me and let you go the way that God planned for you to go. And I'm going to go the way that God planned for me to go. See, a lot of us are disliking people and disliking family because we start picking sides. Because my circle don't like my family, then the circle influences you not to like somebody. But Abraham says, my calling is too big for me to start picking sides. What I'm going to do, Lot, is I'm going to bless you. And I'm going to tell you, look at all this land. If you go left, I'm going right. And if you go right, I'm going left. I'm not going to curse you, but I'm going to bless you. I'm not going to bring a curse upon your life, but I'm going to bless you. Because after all, I pulled you into my direction when God never called you to go with me. So he says, Abraham, let me tell you something. Abraham did not blame Lot for the problems that was going on. He says, Lot, listen, my people and your people just don't get along. So what I'm going to do is we're going to separate. I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to pick sides and start to dislike you because my people don't like your people. He says, well, what I'm going to do, I'm going to love you through it all, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to tell you, you pick the way you want to go, and I'm going to pick the way I want to go. He says, if you let it go in love, you won't have a reason to go back, to keep going back. Because let me tell you something, y'all, what I've been seeing. When you have an attitude with people and you hold a grudge with people and you trying to get to the promise and the plan that God is taking you, you'll find yourself going back to that person because you didn't leave in love, you left in hate. And what hate does is God says, I'm trying to separate you from a bad relationship. But what we do sometimes is we find ourselves, because we didn't leave in love, we didn't bless the person. Now we want to curse the person. We find ourselves going back saying, I got to something else to tell him. And I didn't tell him everything that was on my mind. And he brought his people and I brought my people. And what I should have did is I should have said this. And you'll find yourself keep backpedaling when God is saying, keep going. But because you didn't leave in love, you keep going back. See, Abraham didn't try to keep pulling Lot back to say, Lot, let me tell you something. God gave me this promise. God gave me this plan. I brought you along to try to help you out. See, sometimes we got to stop wasting time trying to tell people off and just bless that person and wish them well. And whichever direction they go in, we got to go in the opposite direction. So God says that when I'm calling you to a mission, yes, there may be turmoil. Yes, there may be turbulence, and some of it is because of your own doing. But God says, I don't want you to start to curse that person, bless that person, and let them go. Let everything go and pick up the instructions and go the way I'm telling you to go. So what he does is he says, to let them go in love. He says, so you won't have to keep running back. Because see, sometimes when we don't let them go in love, we hold on to people because we got to tell them one more thing. And we got to tell them just another thing. And we got to tell them how we really feel. And we got to go to Facebook and make a post. And then we got to go to Instagram and make a post. And then we got to tweet something about them. But God says, if you tell them, listen, because you some kin to me, I love you so much, I got to let you go. And whichever direction you go, I wish you well. If you go to the left, I'm going to the right. And if you go to the right, I'm going to the left. But I'm going to bless you on the path that God is taking you into. Because if we keep going, we going to bump heads. And before I cause you to have to hate me or me to hate you, I'm going to leave you where you at. So what Abraham does is he says, he tells Lot to pick a place. And so Lot looks around. Listen, Lot looks around and he saw the whole playing field of Jordan towards Zorah. It was well watered. So now Lot begins to see what Abraham sees. He says, all this land is before me. And he says, you can go your way and I'll go my way. And he even allowed me to pick the way I want to go. Sometimes you got to separate from people and you got to let them go their way. Because you don't know where God is trying to take them to. They don't know where God is trying to take you to. But I'm going to bless you to go whichever way you feel you should go. And I hope you do the same for me. So now listen, sometimes when you let a person go, they start to see their way through their vision and their purpose. So it says Lot looked around and he saw the whole plan of Jordan towards Zorah and was watered like a garden of the Lord. He says like the land of Egypt. So what he says is, the Bible tells us this is before Solomon, the Gomorrah was destroyed. So it says, so Lot chooses for himself a whole plan of Jordan and he sets out toward the east. So Lot decides he want to go towards Solomon and Gomorrah. Not knowing, God says, I'm going to let Lot go. Lot and his problems, they gonna go whichever way they want to go. But Abraham, whichever way you pick, I'm gonna set you right back on the right path. Because you understand that you got off track trying to pull everybody into the vision that I have given you. So now it says the two men's part company. They didn't fight. They didn't talk about each other. They didn't down each other. But Abraham blessed his nephew and told him, farewell. I'm going this way. You go that way. So it says Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot amongst the city of the plains and pitched a tent near Sodom and Gomorrah. Now check it out. Both of them was pitching tents, but remember I told you when God is taking you from the tent to the mansion, you're going to have to know how to follow instructions. Because if you're trying to bring everybody with you and God says, I got a tent that's big enough to hold you and everything you got on the land, you can't pull a lot of problems in with you. And that's what happened when he told Lot to come on. It says, now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot didn't even know you finna run into a world of sin. You finna run into a world of sin. God says sometimes when I separate you from your problems, they don't even know that where they going is finna be worse than where they could have been. If they just could have agreed with what you was doing, it was better than where they finna go. So now God shows them and he says, Lot went towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Now listen, this is Genesis 13 and verse 14. It says, now God talks to Abraham again about the promise. It says, the Lord said to Abraham, Lot has parted from him. So the Lord tells God, let me tell you something. Sometimes you got to get rid of everything that's blinding you. Because God says this is a mission that don't take forever. But if you keep things that in your path that's going to hinder you, you can't get there until you separate from it. God is saying, stop holding on to people when they have to go their own way in order for you to go your right way. So what he says is, it says the Lord says to Abraham after Lot had parted, think about it. Now God sends you on a mission and all of a sudden you pull Lot in and Lot's circle. Now they circle fighting your circle. God, stop talking. because I never told you to bring Lot with you. So I ain't got nothing to say. Abraham, I'm going to let you figure it out. I'm going to let you remember what I said in the beginning. I'm going to let you go back and I'm going to let you reminisce a little bit on what I told you when I told you what to do. God says, I ain't saying nothing because I never told you to bring Lot and all that baggage that Lot had with him. I never told you to bring them with you. But because you decided to take my will and then add on to your will, it ain't going to work. So what God says is now Abraham, because you realized that you brought Lot into a situation that he was never supposed to be part of, that you're going to have to bless Lot to go his own way. Y'all going to have to disconnect from each other. Because guess what? Lot circle not bringing no light to the situation. What they doing is they finna make the lights go out. And now you finna be in darkness. So Abraham goes back and he remembers what God tells him. And it says, the Lord says to Abraham after Lot had parted. So God says, I'll talk to you again when you fix what you messed up. He says, I'm giving you a land that I promise you. You're going to be a father of many nations. I'm giving you a land. I promise you. Those who curse you, I will curse them. And those who bless you, I will bless them. So God says the promise that you have on your life is so big. I'm going to stop talking right now because this thing has gotten out of control. Do you even know which way you going, Abraham? Because there's so much going on in this situation that I'm going to have to let you realize that you're going to have to let a lot of things go. You're going to have to let your nephew go. You're going to have to let his herdsmen go. They're going to have to take their tent. They're going to have to take their flock and they're going to have to disconnect and separate from you because Abraham, what happened is Lot is about to detour the plan that I have for your life. Not only is he about to do that, he about to drain your alternator and then your battery going to go down. And now you're going to have some dead cells in you if you don't let them go. Thank God for disconnection notice. So Abraham serves his nephew with a disconnection notice and he tell him, listen, just because I'm separating from you, just because I'm evicting you out of the plan that I have, he says, I'm still going to bless you. I'm not going to talk about you. I'm not going to down you and I'm not going to hate you because we still relatives. Abraham says, I'll see you again, because if you go on further, Abraham does have to go and save his nephew. He says, I'll see you again, but right now we can't roll on this land together. So what happens is God comes back and starts talking to Abraham. It says, God tells Abraham, look around from where you are. God says, get your vision back. Because you ain't been looking at the vision. You've been focusing on the issues that's been behind you. So God tells Abraham, he says, look around. Sometimes, don't you know when you disconnect from your problems, you can see again? Don't you know when you remove problems out of your sight, you can see again? Don't you know when you get rid of the thing that's hindering the process and the plan of God, you're going to be able to see again? Don't you know the Bible says he who has an ear, let him hear. God says you will hear from me again when you give disconnection notice to the things that should have never been added to the process anyway. So now he says, look around from where you are to the north and to the south and to the east and to the west. So he tells Abraham, I need you. Now you can see better because you ain't got a lot going on no more. He says, so I want you to look around. Look to the north and the south and the east and the west. He says, all the land that you see, he says, everything that you see, he says, I will give to you and your offsprings forever. So God says, listen, Lot couldn't inherit the blessing that I was putting on your life. You had to separate Abraham in order to understand what I was about to do in your life. So he says, because you've got your vision around, some of us better get our vision back. And God is saying, look around. He's saying, but you first better go back to the beginning of where it all started and what I told you to do and how I told you to do it. He says, and when you understand all the red flags and what took place and what went wrong, he says, I need you to separate from the things that's hindering you from getting to the purpose and the plan. After you separate from the problem, what I want you to do is I want you to take you some rest. And when you take you some rest, I'll talk to you again, because it says he who has an ear, let him hear. But sometimes you got so much going on in your ear to hear. You hearing what channel 5 is saying, channel 2, you hearing what your friends say, you hearing what the people on your job say. God says you can't hear me because you hearing a lot that's going on. God says separate from a lot. So what God begins to tell him, he says, get your vision back. He said, then when you get your vision back, he said, I want you to look around and see what I'm trying to give you and all your offsprings. He said, everything that you see from the north, south, east, and west, it belongs to you and your offsprings. But God says, I'm not doing no talking to you about the plan and the purpose when you got a lot going on. The plan wasn't for me to bless Lot. My plan was for me to bless you. So I needed you to get a lot out your way. So let Lot go. See, sometimes you got to think you got too much going on for God to show you anything. You got too much going on. You listening to too many false allegations. You listening to too much hatred. You listening to too much going on in the world that God says, I ain't saying nothing no more, because you don't even hear what I'm saying no more, because there's a lot going on in your world. When you decide to clear the way, then I'll come back and I'll talk with you. So what he says is, he says, you see all this land that's around you? He says, I'm going to give this to you and I'm going to give this to your offsprings forever. He says, listen, I will make your offsprings like the dust of this earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, he says, you finna have so many offsprings that I'm gonna make it like the dust. Y'all don't even know how much dust on the ground. So God says you're about to have an overflow of things that you can't even count. So what he says is, he says, then your offsprings, he said, then your offsprings could be counted. He says, go walk through. So now God says, I want you to get your faith up. He says, because I need you to go walk through the length and breadth of this land. He says, remember the Bible says faith without works is dead. He says, first you got rid of the problem. He says, second, you got your sight back. He says, third, you see the plan that I have for your life. He says, now I want you to get your faith. Faith without works is dead. He says, go walk through the length of the breadth of this land. He says, I want you to walk around everything that's on this land. See, God says, if you can keep the faith and understand what I'm doing, faith is the substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Abraham couldn't see what God was doing until he got a lot out of his way. So what God says is, get up. Faith without works is dead. I need you to start moving around what I promise you. He says, for I am giving it to you. God says, everything that's right here from the north, west, east, and south, it belongs to you. He says, but I want you to show you that I'm a man of my word, because God says, listen, not a man of his word. God says, I'm not a man that I shall lie. My word is not going out and coming back to me void. He says, I want you to walk around, because sometimes you got to see it to believe it. And sometimes you got to feel it to know that it's yours. God says, I want you to put your feet on this land. Remember, I said, God says, I'm trying to give you a city, but you keep bringing the people off the block. He says, I can't give you a city if you won't leave the block. But because you can see again, he says, I can show you everything that I promise you. Now listen. It says, so Abraham, this place where God has showed him, he says he pitched the tent, then he built the altar to the Lord. Abraham left the altar that he originally built because him and Lot had problems right there. And he builds another altar to worship God for what he was doing for them. Now, Abraham is in a tent. But it's okay, God showed me, to be in a tent when your land extends from the northwest, east, and south. God said you got so much land that when you tired of the tent, you just get up and build a mansion. God says you got so much land that your kids will never have to want for anything, because I promise you something, Abraham. And as I begin to look at the story, I begin to look and I begin to say, thank God for what he's doing in our life. And thank God that God is saying disconnect from the things that's holding you back. See, sometimes you living in a tent, but if you keep the people around you that's in the tent with you, sometimes they can't see that we got a land that's promised to us, and they can't see that faith without works is dead. God says, when I say move, you move. And as I began to look, I says, in order to walk in your calling, you got to be in peace. So God was showing me that Abraham couldn't be in peace and keep going on the promise that God was taking him on, because he had a lot going on. It was starting to be turbulence in the land. It says what God is giving you. It says cut it off. You got to disconnect. But let me tell you something. When you leave, when you cut it off, you leave in love in order to be free in the mind, the heart. Trust God's plan for your life. Don't never leave. What God showed me is when you create a issue, because he brought his nephew with him. You can't turn around and start dogging Lot when you told Lot, get up and come with me. He says you're going to have to bless them and send them on their way. He says, and if you can bless them in love, because love will cover a multitude of sin. God says, remember, I love the world so that I sent my son. So he says, you're going to have to love them and let them go. You're going to have to love them and leave them. You're going to have to let everything go. Because what God was showing me, that sometimes, just think about it. If Abraham had to start to talk bad about Lot, which was a person that he brought with him, how could God look at Abraham? You creating problems on top of problems, but what I need you to do is bless your nephew and let him go. Sometimes in order to complete the promise in our life, we're going to have to bless some people and let them go. Because you're going to have to tell them, listen, this car too small for me and you. And if I keep driving along the way with me and you, you're going to drain my alternator. And if you turn around and drain my alternator in my life, then you start to drain my battery. And if you drain the battery in my life, you start to disturb my peace. Because what you bringing along in the path is nothing but problems. Don't y'all know that hate, envy, bitterness, strife, it don't do nothing but drain you and take you out of peace. You can't even sleep in a tent in peace if you don't get some rest. So God says what you need to do, Abraham, you got to rest, because you had a lot going on. And when you recuperate yourself, he says, then you can get your power and your authority back up. When you recuperate yourself, you're going to see the vision that I gave you. When you recuperate yourself, you're going to move into the land that I promise you and your offsprings. When you recuperate yourself, you're going to see that the baby that I promised you and your wife at an old age, you're going to see it come to pass. Some things can't come to pass because we got a lot going on. And what God is saying, how you get rid of a lot of problems in your life, you need to free it. You need to give it a disconnection notice and let it go. And then when you disconnect service, see, sometimes you understand when you don't want cable no more, you just call them and says, I no longer need your services. And they disconnect the services, and that separates you from Comcast. When you don't want direct TV no more, you go ahead and call and say, I no longer want your services, and they'll disconnect their services from you, and you don't have direct TV no more. Sometimes in life, you're going to have to disconnect and say, listen, I no longer need your service, because what's happening is it's causing me problems. See, direct TV, if you got direct TV and this storm comes, then you lose your power to your TV. So you says I can't afford to lose power no more with direct TV. So guess what? I no longer need your service, because when I need to watch TV, you telling me that a storm has came in my life, and that's not serving me any justice in my life. I got somewhere to go, so I need to be able to see. See, what Lot did is he started the picture to be real fuzzy. Not Lot, but Lot's circle. Sometimes it's not even the people, it's not even the two individuals that have the issue. It's the circle that starts the issue. But the two individuals, if they can't see through the storm, then they jump right in the storm. And you got a storm on top of a storm. You got to tell some people, listen, I bless you in the name of the Lord, but your services are no longer needed. The path that God has taken me on, I can't afford for the alternator to go out, because if the alternator goes out in my life, then my battery starts to get drained. And if my battery starts to get drained, I have no power and authority to do what God says do, because now I need a jump, plus I need a new alternator. And it's only so many times I can change the battery and not change the alternator. You can keep jumping the battery, but the alternator is bad. I can't keep allowing you to cause problem. You keep jumping the battery, but you're killing my alternator. So God is saying, sometimes in life we got to just disconnect from the situation and the circumstance. You know, over the last couple of months, I found myself wrestling with stuff, and I'm asking God. I says, God, I know that you showed me a plan, and I know that you showed me a purpose. And sometimes I feel like Abraham, that when you're trying to get somewhere, that a lot is getting in your way, and you don't understand where's all the strife and where's all the bitterness coming from, and why this and why that, and what's hindering the problem. And as I begin to lay in the bed and I began to talk to God, and I says, God, I know and I understand the calling that you have on my life, that it came from you and it didn't come from man. And you told me specifically how to get to the plan and the calling. And I don't understand where's the hindrance and where's the roadblocks coming in. And God began to show me, he says, you got a lot going on. He says sometimes you're going to have to disconnect and break out from everything that you thought was beneficial to the mission. You're going to have to leave it behind. And as I began to talk to my husband on yesterday, I was talking to him and I was telling him, I says, God showed me the illustration of an alternator being bad, and in turn the alternator will turn around and drain the battery, and once the battery's drained, it causes a problem for the whole car. Now the car has been stalled because you got a faulty component that will shut the whole thing down. And as I begin to look, I just begin to thank God, and he showed me the story of, y'all go back and read it in y'all spare time. It's Genesis 13. You can read the whole chapter, and it tells you about Abraham and Lot separated, but also go a little further. It shows you just because you separate from certain people don't mean you'll cross their path, won't cross their path again, because Abraham loved his nephew, and Lot got to a point where Lot got in trouble, and Abraham had to go back and plead to God on Lot's behalf in Sodom and Gomorrah. So just read the story. But God has to get you situated and equipped where he's trying to take you to before he can send you to be a rescue. You can't rescue nobody, and you ain't even got to what God is trying to tell you. All you can do is cause a problem on top of a problem. So y'all, with that being said, I pray that God blesses each and every one of you all with this message, that if God is trying to take you anywhere, and that he's shown, y'all give me a minute. If he's shown you anything and you feel like there's roadblocks and stumbling blocks, go back to the beginning. Sometimes you got to ask God, where did I go wrong? Like, what did I do? What did I pull too much in? Did I take a lot on at one time? And as God began to show me, he says, sometimes you just got to start serving disconnection notice. Let me tell you something. A landlord can be the best example. Don't produce their money and watch how fast they serve you an eviction. And they tell you was a good tenant, but your time is up. I'm providing you a place, and I need you to provide me my money. If not, we gonna have to separate, and I'm gonna wish you well. Good luck on the next apartment that you get, or good luck on the next house that you buy, because right now you going into foreclosure. So as I begin to look, I begin to say that God is saying sometimes you're gonna have to give disconnection notice. You gotta stop letting people drain your battery. And that's what Lot was doing. He started to drain, because it says finally. So the Bible doesn't tell us how long Abraham and Lot had went through this bickering and quarreling with they circle, but it says finally Abraham got tired. And what Abraham did, he says, listen, I love you, but we need to go our own ways. I love you, but if I keep you with me, we ain't gonna have nothing but a bunch of problems. I love you, but if I don't let you go, I can't get to where God is trying to take me to. See, sometimes, y'all, we put our trust more in man, and we put our trust more in woman than we put our trust in God. We feel like God gives us a plan. We get excited and we feel like we got to pull everybody in, when God's saying you creating a problem for yourself. And so, y'all, I just pray. And I was thankful for the people who got on, Pat, Tamika, I seen Monique earlier, Paris, Linda Boo, Charlene Rainey, Latanya Rainey, Taz, I seen you on earlier, Pierre, I seen you on earlier. Sherry Dillard, thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. I'm glad you joined in with us on tonight. Did I miss anybody? Tasha Washington, I had seen you on early. Thank you so much. Keisha, thank you so much for joining in with us. I was praying to God that Gigi Love, who? Oh, Ada, my friend Ada. Thank you so much for joining in. Amina Muhammad, thank you so much for joining in. Oh, Lakeisha Lucky, thank you for joining in so much too. If I missed anybody, charge it to my head and not my heart. I pray that um Tamika McHolmes, thank you for joining in. I see my mama on here. Thank you, Dota, for joining in with me. If I missed anybody, like I said, charge it to my head and not my heart. But I had prayed that God would bring more people, because I think a lot of us are caught up in a cycle of J. Lou. Thank you so much for joining in with us on tonight. I think that's it. Oh, happy birthday, J. Lou. Your birthday on tomorrow. May God continue to bless you. And I had prayed that God would send people on this podcast, because as I begin to talk to my husband, sometimes it seems like you're caught up in a whirlwind, or you're caught up in a tornado, and you can't seem to find your way out. And as I began to pray the other night to God, and I just began to thank him for who he is and what he's doing in our life, I just began to bless God, and God began to speak to me, and he began to show me that sometimes you just got to serve a disconnection notice. Thank you, Tasha. Thank you so much. Sometimes you got to serve a disconnection notice. Sometimes we have jobs that's straining and draining us, and it's God is saying you put more trust in a job than you put in me. Sometimes you just got to disconnect from the things that's pulling you off the path. And I really did. I wanted so many people. I pray that y'all share this video out, tag people in. Linda Boo, thank you. I felt like people needed to hear this message, because like I said, we're caught up in whirlwinds, and we're not understanding why, how you see the little dog just keep chasing his tail but never catch up with it. We're not understanding why we chasing the same thing. And thank you, Pat. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being on here tonight. We wonder why. I'm glad I can make your day, Pat. I am. You make my day as well. I am so happy I can make your day. And we wonder why we are in like limbo land, and God was saying disconnect. And it was so, y'all, it was so awesome how he began to show me you missed one bill. ComEd, Nightcore, People Gas, T-Mobile, they will shut you down and don't care. Until you can give them what they need to keep functioning, they cutting it off. And so sometimes in life, that's what we got to feel like, until if you're not providing what I needed, I got to cut it off. I can't keep trying to pay you $200-300 to watch TV and you telling me a storm is in my life. What is the purpose of me paying you? Let me just disconnect from you. So with that being said, y'all, give it up for my husband who puts this podcast together for me on tonight. He's behind the scenes doing this stuff that he does. I don't know. But I thank God for him that he has it ready for me when I get off of work. Also, y'all give it up for him for that Monday Night Live. I'm glad we could bring some life to y'all on situations, that need to be talked about. Sometimes when you're doing the work of God, some situation people are really scared to touch. But if you notice, if you go in the Bible, God touches everything because it's important. You can't not talk about the things that God is telling you to talk about. So y'all, with that being said, we just really appreciate each and every one of you. I thank God for keeping each and every one of you on tonight. Thank you, Sherry Dillard. I thank God. Charlene says she appreciates you. We appreciate you too. Love you too, Charlene. Sometimes we have to touch on the things, and we do it. It's all done in the love of God. As I says, what I'm learning in this life, and I'm going to let y'all go. What I'm learning in this life, we're going to have to learn to do things in love, because God keeps saying love covers a multitudes of sin. And if love will cover things, God is saying if you can love people anyhow, he says you can move on with your day because you have no reason to keep going back. So with that being said, Tamika, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, Yolanda Sims, thank you so much, Auntie, for joining in with us on tonight. Y'all, it's good to have. I know I talked about Abraham and Lot, and they were uncle and nephew, but it's good to have y'all, we all like family on this podcast, and it's good. I consider, like I said, we all cousin, auntie, uncles, whatever you want to be. We there. We are family. We are family. But it's good to have family that will support you instead of hinder you. So I do want to thank you guys for that. Me and my husband, both from the bottom of our heart, that we appreciate you all. And we do every time we tell y'all to get on, y'all jump on there for us, and y'all do hang in there with us. So I just appreciate it so much. With that being said, I'm not gonna hold you all. I pray each and every one of you all receive something from this message on tonight. I pray that God opens up your wisdom, your knowledge, and your understanding of the promises and the plans and the purposes that he has for your life. I pray that God opens up a path that'll get a lot out your way so that you can fulfill the mission and the purpose that he has for you. Love you too, Yolanda. With that being said, until Monday, we'll be back on, me and my husband, and then Lord's will Thursday. So y'all keep us in y'all prayers, and I'll pray for you all as well as you all pray for me. As we always say, you can support the podcast we got the Cash App on there. I'm gonna put a Zelle up there, but if you can't financially support us by just sharing the reels, just liking the reels, loving the reels. Share the podcast, like the podcast, love the podcast. Go to YouTube, subscribe to YouTube, watch it on YouTube, share it on YouTube. Anything you can do to push these videos out, we appreciate it. Everything that you put in, we appreciate it, whether it's financial or whether it's just physically doing something to push it out. We truly appreciate it from the bottom of our heart. With that being said, we by y'all next week, I think I'm gonna have a flyer coming out. Once my husband put it together, I'm gonna have a flyer coming out for this program that I'm trying to put together live. Y'all, I'm gonna need y'all support. I need y'all support. I trust that y'all gonna support me on this, because this thing is gonna be awesome, and it's something that God has showed us. And it's funny that God will show you something 7 years ago, and it'll come to pass 7 years later. But we also know that if you look up the number 7 in the Bible, that means a completion. So God is completing some things to do a new thing. With that being said, y'all, I'm out of here, and I just pray God blesses each and every one of you all on tonight.